I think like in a lot of arenas in life, more than anything, it's getting up and practicing and doing that we learn from doing and we learn from practicing. If I have sort of like one message about why I love improv, it's that it is using that muscle of doing something before you're ready to do it, right? And
Yeah.
so much of life is about being scared to start something and retreating to, I'm going to read a few books about speaking before I ever try and speak in front of people, or I'm going to, research this endlessly before I try it. And we learn so much more by doing than from reading.
Well, welcome back to the Executive Exhale podcast. I'm excited to have Andrew Davies, who I am so happy to finally have on the show because for bunch of reasons I've been having to delay this show. So I'm happy to have you finally. I'm going to just introduce you to the audience a little bit here. Andrew Davies is the Better Meetings Director of Artly Working, which uses improv and theater to help build stronger teams made up of happier people and higher performers. Since starting in 2019, Artly Working has led programs with over 100 innovative companies like Netflix, Roblox, Meta, and Google, with training in improvisation from the Magnet Theater, the facilitation from Georgetown University. Andrew is passionate about bringing those skills to strengthen company culture and people experiences. His Better Meetings workshop helps teams to gather with purpose and play, designing and facilitating more effective meetings that people actually want to attend, which is exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Andrew has won several awards for his groundbreaking work, including the Young Pioneer Award from the Jewish Education Project and the Pomegranate Prize from the Covenant Foundation. Andrew is also the co-founder of Caricatures, a theatrical walking tours where the past visits you, and the Bible Players, a Jewish comedy team. When Andrew's not working, he can be found making up songs with his toddlers, Miller and Oren, bike riding around Philadelphia, or leading a free tennis camp in the neighborhood. Welcome to the show. You have a very full life.
Thanks so much for having me, Tammy. And yeah, as I think we all do, I'm a busy, happy, exhausted parent. And
Yeah.
yeah, happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that all too well. My three are teenagers now, so they don't need me quite as much as the young toddlers. But yes, I remember that space very, very well. This is an interesting topic for this channel because I really love bringing in different concepts to the notion of wellness and resilience and effectiveness as teams, and bringing in the notion of improv is something I never really thought about. And so when we connected to do this podcast, I thought, hey, yeah, this sounds interesting to me because this is so different from what I'm used to. Improv is definitely not something that I'm into. So I'm just curious, what drew you to that world and bringing it into the workplace? I'm just really curious about this.
Yeah. So improvisation is definitely something that people usually think of as comedy shows on the stage, performance. Maybe you've heard of, Amy Poehler or Tina Fey or some of the kind of legends of this world.
Yeah.
I think for me, what was special was when I was studying improv in New York City and performing on teams, I began to notice kind of the skills and the approach of improv affecting all different areas of my life, including the way that I approached the workplace, my relationships, my friendships. And I began to feel that these tools could be really valuable for people, even people who see themselves as introverts, not
Mm,
performative. That's their nightmares to be put on an improv stage.
right.
I think the mindset and the values and the approach of improv are so helpful for team dynamics, for personal performance, for happiness in the workplace, for being seen and heard. And so with my friend Dave Klasko, we really started experimenting with what could we bring to companies and organizations. Might it be valuable for them? And what we found was that the way we could be helpful is in helping with team dynamics, building trust on teams. And so much of the work that's done, I think so many of the soft skills, quote unquote, that we take for granted and that we don't actually know how to practice, improv is a great way to practice them. I always feel like people think you're either confident or you're not, or you're a great presenter or you're not, or you're a great listener or you're not, but that's not really true. It's a muscle like anything else. And
Right.
improv is an amazing way to practice and grow that muscle.
Yeah, I mean, and at the root of it is communication, really connecting. I love the fact that you brought in the notion of trust and engaging in that communication to enhance trust. So you've worked with a number of these pretty large organizations. What do you think they were thinking about when they were hiring you to come into this corporate setting? What do you think their perspective was versus what actually emerged, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of the time when folks first bring us in, at least the first program we do for a company, they're
Mm,
thinking, we just want something really fun for our team. And they're
right.
just starting from the place of fun, joy, we want to bring people together. We really exploded in popularity during the pandemic because people working remotely, whole teams being remote was overwhelming for everyone. And
Right.
so, honestly, people learned that a happy hour is great in person. A happy hour is torture on your computer, right? That's not fun. So, what's great about improv is that it's always participatory. We're playing, we're learning together. So I think people kind of bring us in because of the fun and the joy, and we sneak in the values and the learning. And then usually the second or third time they bring us in is when they realize, let's dive deeper. Let's talk about how we can change our meetings. Let's talk about how we can change our values or our presentations for the team. So it is really the gateway of joy and humor is how we get into it. But then we dive deeper the more time we spend together and the more people open up to it. And I think even in every hour that I do of improv, the first 5 minutes, people are a little scared, they're a
Yeah.
little nervous, but a little excited about how fun it is. And by the end, we're really seeing how much people are taking away and how they're going to think differently about active listening, about collaboration and teamwork, about all these things. So
I just
it's
have this image of like these full-on skits by the end of the hour with the team.
yeah, we
We've got
do.
like
We
John Candy and Catherine O'Hare kind of skits going on, like Schitt's Creek kind of stuff going on. That's hilarious.
exactly.
Anything surprise you in this work that you've done so far? Like, has anything when you've done these sessions? I'm sure you've done many of these sessions. So, anything surprise you as you're doing this work?
Every time there's
Yeah,
surprises. And that's the fun of improv, right? And I think the joy of these tools is that you come back to them and every time it's a little bit different, right? So I love seeing teams discover hidden talents on their team they didn't know existed. So when you're talking about like
right.
building to a sketch, oftentimes an activity that we build towards is having a team create a commercial together, not for their company, like not for Netflix or Google, the big company, but for their team, for their specific team, and like why you should want to work on that team. And so we see them come out with all these amazing inside jokes, a song parody of some song that they love. But just like last week, I was leading one in New York City, and one of the elements of it is we say, come up with like a logo for your team, not for your company, but for your team.
Yeah.
And this woman, it started, I asked like, who's a good, anyone want to draw? Like who likes drawing? And like no hands go up. And then
Mhm.
quietly, this one woman started just kind of drawing in the corner. And what she came out with was this like amazing, like ninja kicking through a worksheet like logo that was just so incredible that everyone in the room was like blown away by this artistic skill that she had that's
Mhm.
unrelated to her work in general, but just that is part of her and an amazing asset. And I think one of the beautiful things for me about improv that you see is people rediscovering or getting to share their creativity in ways that it doesn't come up day to day in the workplace, right? Like their job is the HR person or the accountant or the team manager, but actually there's the incredible artist as well. And so I love seeing that and having the team think about, hey, next time we're doing something, like let's make sure we like email Janet and be like, Janet, can you draw something for this? Like that would be amazing. And I love
Yeah.
seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah, not to mention that you're bringing in these extra skills that people have in very vital conversations sometimes. We think about strategic planning as very boring, black and white. We're talking about these risk and threat assessments and all this really kind of, let's be frank, humdrum stuff that can really put people to sleep. But the notion of bringing out these talents and bringing out this creativity, I think it kind of enlivens that whole process. I absolutely love that. You mentioned before, and I read somewhere in the research I was doing that you are quoted of saying improv makes intangibles tangible. So, what do you mean by that when you're talking about the team well-being and the leadership? Is this kind of what you're building on, what you just said, or is there more to it?
Yeah. So I definitely think that improv makes the intangibles very tangible, which is really exciting. I think if you look at any company's webpage, you'll see kind of the core values of the company, and it might say
Yeah,
something like trust, creativity, inspiration, we've got each other's back, all these things. But when you talk to folks at the organization about, do you live those out? Do you do those? What do those mean? How do you practice that, right? Like, how do you practice trusting your team? How do you practice having each other's back? And what's great about improv is that it forces you into this kind of strange, unnatural game where you have to create something on the spot together. And so if you don't trust each other, you can't play this game. You need to kind of build that skill. So I think it makes these things like trusting your team, like collaborating, like building something together, extremely tangible because when we do those like commercial building, for instance, it's very obvious by the end of the 15 minutes which teams like trust each other and work together and build things together and which teams are struggling with that, right? And it finds it really hard in that situation. Whereas I think a lot of times in the day-to-day of organization, like you said, we're talking about metrics, we're talking about risk assessment, we're talking about this quarter versus last quarter, and those things can get really lost or
Right.
feel really abstract or confusing. And in improv, they're very tangible and not abstract at all.
Yeah, I love that because I feel like this. Actually, I'd be curious to see how do you take you have an event, you're doing these exercises as a team, as a group, you're exploring creativity, you're doing all these things. And, one could say, well, I can compartmentalize that. It was a day of like, team building or strategy building, what have you. We brought Andrew in and his team and we did this work, but now we're going back to work tomorrow morning. How does that translate in the longer term or in the medium to longer term in terms of activities or in terms of mindsets that go on beyond the session that you've created? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question and a huge challenge that I don't want to pretend that we've completely tackled. My good friend Minna
Right.
Taylor's been a speech coach for years, and she talks about this a lot with teams that you can have an amazing day together, but does it affect the culture, right? Do people compartmentalize that? And I think in our own lives we know that too, right? Like we get a personal trainer for one session, we're amazing for 2 hours, and then come the next week, it's like we've forgotten everything. We're not lifting weights, we're not doing the thing.
We're
So
eating the
my
cake.
we're eating the cake, and we're not going to the gym ever again, right? So I think what I encourage folks to do is to think about one very specific upcoming meeting or gathering and work on planning that during our time with them. So when we're with them, I ask them to already look ahead to a very tangible upcoming moment. It might be your weekly check-in meeting, it might be a retreat coming up, and to ask yourself like how you can bring in these tools of improv or these approaches or the ABCs that we have of meetings and bring it to that approach. And for
Right.
managers of teams and heads of teams, the challenge that I ask them to consider is, can you carve out 1 hour a month that you really try and build on this momentum? Like, can you
Right.
carve out an hour a month? It may be part of a regular meeting, or it may be a special new meeting where you say one Friday a month, the last Friday of the month, we're going to spend an hour where we're not allowed to get sidetracked by emails or, quarterly reports. And we have to focus on our team. We have to focus on our people because that feels more tangible to me. If we say every day, I want you to start every day of work with 20 minutes of team building, I know that's not going to happen. And that's a recipe for failure, right? But I'm like, if we can carve out a moment every month to kind of keep that momentum and build on it, that's huge. And another thing I'll say is that since we started, what we started offering and we do with several organizations is we help with onboarding all their new team members, everyone new that's hired, which we think is a really great way to, from the get-go, have them learn about the organization and learn about this approach to the company culture and all their values
Right.
through this work. So what we actually do is work with their company and say, okay, what are your core values that you onboard with folks? And instead of just talking about those values or having them read a paragraph, let's play some improv games that bring those values to life and have it start from the beginning, because I think it's much easier to take someone that's starting and say, we're going to show you and you're going to experience how collaboration is a part of our workplace, rather than someone who's 5 years in saying, okay, I know we've been terrible, but from now on we're collaborating, right? So that's
Right.
another element of it.
I kind of like this because it's bringing the 2D sort of on written paper to 3 and even 4D because you're getting the senses involved in this sort of process. It ingrains the values. I love that you've explained this perfectly. It really does bring the values to a more tangible state because I always find that mission and vision statements and all that are very, very important to companies. I have one for my company. It's important, but if you don't actually live them out, actually act them out, it doesn't really land the same way. So I love how you bring that to the front to the fore. So I'm wondering then. One of the things that I help executives do is in my sort of mindfulness and neuroregulation space is when there's moments of tension or when they feel sort of triggered, some things that resets they can do in the moment to keep themselves regulated so that they can function in a way that is productive rather than not productive. So I am curious about these skills that they're learning in the workshops or even as individuals for the onboarding piece. how these skills can support leaders when they're in a conflict, like a conflict or a tension sort of situation, how these skills might support them in those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons I love improv as a practice to build those types of skills of dealing with tense situations, difficult conversations, surprises that come up is that improv feels very high stakes, but is actually very low stakes, right? So when we introduce a game with folks, we have one that we love called I Love That, where as a team, we get a sort of apocalyptic scenario like you're surrounded by zombies in the subway and the power is shut down. How are you going to get out? And as a team, they have to build together and say one thing and say, I love that. And what's great is that when we introduce that and when we get people to come up, it feels very high stakes. They feel nervous, they're
Yeah.
sweating, they're scared, but the stakes are actually very low, right? There's no client who's judging this scene. They're not going to get a bonus or lose a bonus based on how they perform in this scene. So
Right.
it feels very high stakes, but it's actually very low stakes. And so what I encourage people to do is notice, how did you feel when you were doing that scene? Did your heart race? Did you feel
Mhm.
your palms getting sweaty? Did your posture change in ways that were challenging? Did you feel nervous to speak? Did you feel nervous to come up with new ideas? And so if we can have these situations that are low stakes, but simulate the high stakes of some of those situations you were talking about, we can notice about ourselves and we can kind of deal with that without the pressure of it being a big failure or loss, right? Without the first time we're feeling that being when we are having to let an employee go, we're having that difficult conversation, or we're giving a presentation for our entire organization for the first time. So if we can learn about ourselves in those situations that feel high stakes but are actually very low stakes, we can learn kind of what triggers us and we can learn some of those tools that will help us because like you said, you can share those tools with folks, right? But everyone needs something different. Everyone has different challenges. So if you can start by noticing what challenges you, then you can come back to other episodes of this podcast, right? To people
Yeah.
in your life, to people in your organization and say, I notice I get really scared and my my mouth gets dry and I have trouble starting to speak. And I know
Yeah.
once I speak, I'll be okay, but what do I do in that moment, right? So I think it's noticing is so often the first step.
It almost feels like the improv opportunity that you're providing gives people an opportunity, as you say, in a sort of a low stake situation, practice. And it's really about raising awareness. And you're absolutely right. You cannot neuroregulate what you don't understand or what you don't know. And so it's really clear, like what you're suggesting is the notion that you're becoming heightened, there's a heightened awareness on how somatically your body's reacting in those moments of stress. And so this gives you an opportunity to practice how to quell or how to manage in the moment. So improv kind of makes you face those anxieties right up front, right? And then you have to figure out how to move through them. So then, how do you see people move through that in the improv situation in the actual workshops? How are you watching people go from that state to a more calm state? Like, what are some of the things that they're doing that you're noticing that these people are doing in order to get themselves from this like heightened stress anxiety response to a more calm centered approach to their improv by the end of the day, say? I'm curious about what that transition looks like because there are messages in there for people that listen to my content that there are lessons in the improv world that can help you to, in essence, self-regulate because you're aware. So I'm curious if like bring us down a level deeper of what that looks like for the individual in your workshop, say, where they're going from super heightened extreme anxiety to, I think I got this. So yeah, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think like in a lot of arenas in life, more than anything, it's getting up and practicing and doing that we learn from doing and we learn from practicing. If I have sort of like one message about why I love improv, it's that it is using that muscle of doing something before you're ready to do it, right? And
Yeah.
so much of life is about being scared to start something and retreating to, I'm going to read a few books about speaking before I ever try and speak in front of people, or I'm going to, research this endlessly before I try it. And we learn so much more by doing than from reading. So what I see with folks in our workshops is we often start by saying, we're not asking you to be a Broadway performer right now. We're just asking you to notice where you are in your comfort level and just see if you can like turn that knob the tiniest little degree. So for some folks, when we start with our initial games and it's kind of walking into the center of the circle, that alone is overwhelming. And even just stepping into the center and whispering something is like a victory for that person, right? So we're each starting from such a different place that it looks different. So for some people, it's the first game, they don't step in the middle at all. And by the last game, they're able to step into the middle and speak and take their turn. And for them, that's the big victory. For some folks, it's the opposite. Some folks I see, they jump into the middle and they're talking and speaking a lot very quickly. And they see through the improv, I see them realize I've actually got to slow down because I'm not able to listen as well as I want while I'm speaking so much. So for them, they notice I need to let other people speak first and then jump in and add on to that because my instinct is to run away with my ideas and not let other people speak first. So I think it's noticing those micro adjustments that people make in themselves from the beginning of our time together to the end. A lot of times I see people just taking a deep breath and then kind of stepping into the middle. I see them have that moment. I don't know if you've seen this amazing video that the New York Times did a few years ago, I believe, of folks on a high dive board. And
Oh,
it's just a silent film. And all it is kind of the high dive at an Olympic level. And it's just filming people stepping up to that high dive board and walking on the board and deciding whether or not to jump or to just stand or walk down. And you see them tortured, and some people jump right away. Some people keep going to the edge and then come back. Some people end up climbing down the ladder and not doing it. But watching those different reactions, yeah, that would be you. Yeah. I think is like really fascinating. And I think that's what we see too is right. For some folks, this is such a high dive that even to just step onto that board is such an accomplishment. Um, for some folks, they're able to jump right away, but can they pause and do it the right way or slow down? So I think it's finding their breath in those moments and seeing people go from kind of sweating panic at the beginning of a scene to a little bit more themselves before we started the game, right? It's like finding that relaxation, finding yourself in those stressful moments is often the hardest part. Like we all have these skills, but they run away from us in these high stress moments. But can
yeah.
we come back to them in those moments?
I absolutely love the notion that you've seen the inverse where you have the one person who's very hesitant to jump into the circle, but then you've got the one who's like, "Yeah, I'm in," but they realize that they're going too fast. I love that perspective because we often think of the person who's maybe a little quieter, a little bit less willing to jump in and take the risks, but really there's so much to be learned on the other end of the spectrum as well. So thanks for bringing that. It's really important. What I love about this is the notion of psychological safety that you're creating. It almost feels like at the very front of the day, no one's really sure. Like, I know this guy's a good guy. I talk to him with coffee in hand in the mornings. He seems like a decent guy, but I don't know if I want to do this activity with this person. And by the end of the day, the psychological safety you've created in your environment is such that everybody kind of comes out of their shell a little bit. I think there's got to be so much that translates into like innovation and retention for the organization. Have you ever heard from folks after you've done these sessions to say, yeah, well, maybe the whole culture hasn't shifted, but you know what? We find it so much easier to talk now when we're in boardrooms together. So I'm wondering if you've seen that sort of more connectivity, the psychological safety improve as a result of this work.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought up the psychological safety element because I think, as we think about jobs in the 20th and the 21st century, I think the battle of the 20th century in a lot of ways was to make physical safety in workplaces, right? Like, working hours, safety in the workplace, that's still a battle in so many places. In the spaces that we do these programs, right, which are more in tech companies, health tech companies, intellectual field, it's really the psychological safety that's so important and so often lacking.
Mhm.
And something that I try and communicate all the time is can you make your meetings feel as safe as you felt jumping into this circle, right? Like we play a game called Speech, where we take turns coming into the center of the circle and saying, I'm sick and tired of. And then someone in the outside of the circle says what the thing is we're sick and tired of. So pencils or trees or cars. And we have to make up a speech on the spot, right? And so that requires so much psychological safety to feel I'm going to be supported by my group. And in the workplace, we often don't think about this at all. And we don't realize how many people we're losing because of that. Like you said, the retention and how many great ideas we're losing because of that, right? Because Tammy, like if you or I are in a meeting and someone says like, anybody got any new ideas for like how we can market this? In that moment, I'm thinking to myself, am I psychologically safe here? Is my bad idea going to be safe here? Like if I say, hey, I think we should sell Girl Scout cookies. And while we're doing it, we should talk about our new product or whatever it is. Or is someone going to say, that's so dumb, Andrew. Why would you bring that up? Right? Because if we do that, if someone does that, even jokingly, I might never bring up an idea again. Right. And so we don't realize how often if we don't create that psychological safety, we just miss out on all those great ideas, all that great brainstorming. So to create a space, and a lot of people, if they've heard anything about improv, is this idea of yes and I
Yeah.
think that's sometimes challenging for people because they think I have to say yes and to everything, and it's no, you're saying yes and to the person and to their nugget of an idea so that we can fully flesh it out. And then later we can say we don't have the budget for that. But when someone says, "Hey, I think we should have our like next retreat on a boat." If your first reaction is, "We can't do that. We don't have the budget for that. We're not doing that." Then you never flesh out that idea. But if you say, "Oh, that sounds fun. Like, why were you thinking a boat would be awesome for a retreat?" And they might say, because we're always inside and I want to be outside. And so you can find the why behind it.
Yeah.
But if you don't create that psychological safety to share, it's never shared. So that's why I really try and encourage folks to once a month have that check-in and say, how are we doing? Like, do we still have that psychological safety we felt with Andrew that one day? Or have we lost it? Have we returned back to our old ways and are missing that?
Yeah, and keeping the outside world in the outside, not in the podcast. Reality is we're living in very divisive and very tense times. And so that is even more important in the corporate boardroom and in the corporate environments right now to ensure that we maintain that psychological safety, that people feel safe to speak their ideas, their thoughts, obviously from a professional perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, thanks for engaging in that conversation. And you mentioned remote workers and how much more engaged. So, how do these activities translate? Are they like a direct translation in terms of what you do in person, or do you have to modify these sessions somewhat? Obviously, you have to modify some of it, but I'm curious as to what that looks like. Because I'm thinking if there's people online, like, I'd like to maybe introduce some of this notion into my meetings, but I'm not sure how it would work virtually or in this day and age, especially here in Canada, it's very much a hybrid situation where some folks are in the office, some are still working from home because of the way they were hired and so on. So how does that work in that environment? I'm curious what the differences are between an in-person and a virtual session.
Yeah, so we definitely with Artly Working do a lot of both, right? Because like you
Right.
said, a lot of teams are fully remote, a lot of teams are hybrid,
Yeah.
and some are all in person, but it's mostly hybrid and remote in the teams we work with. I think the interactivity and the engagement is still very possible, and it takes more intention, right? When we're sitting with people around a table, it can be very easy to make sure everyone's included, to try and see if someone is like zoning out or disengaged. Online, we really have to be a little more intentional with including people because we're all home, right? Like right now, Tammy, you and I are talking from a distance. It would be very easy for one of us to be distracted by something else on our desk, something we're doing later, a cat or a dog in the house, whatever, a kid.
Right.
So to engage people is super important. So one of the metrics that I always try and challenge people with about meetings is what percentage of your meeting was interactive versus frontal? Like how much can you do that will make it interactive and make people feel included versus
Right.
asking people to sit frontally? I think when we're at a table and we're sharing something frontal, we can gauge very easily in the room, like, oh, the energy's dropping. People need to stand up and move around. But online, that's not so easy to gauge that, right? So I think we need to more intentionally play games together. But like that game I shared, Speech, a great one to play online. One of my favorite ones I'll share with your listeners, you can play right now at your next meeting with people online, is that you have everyone take 10 seconds, grab an item off camera, and just like bring it over, any item you want, right? And then you have people make up a problem. So you say, like, Tammy, I have a problem. I need to take my dog for a walk, but it's raining and he doesn't want to go out in the rain. And then you have to solve that problem using the object that you already chose on your end. You didn't see, right? So
I love that.
it's a blast, and you go around, and it's a fun way to get everyone engaged. Everyone at least gets to like share something that they found in their house,
Yeah.
but it also is reminding your team like our creativity is what's going to solve the problems, right? Like we can solve any problem that comes up with the things we already have. We just need to be creative. But that's a fun one you can play online if folks are fading, if folks are, need some more energy, that'll wake everyone up for sure.
I think you shared something around the Martin Luther King Jr. thing. I have a dream speech was improvised. Is that true? Is that what you shared that once online? Yeah. So I want to verify
Yeah.
that fact. So what does that teach us then about authenticity and being in the moment?
So, yeah, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, for folks that don't know, he had a whole plan of what the speech was going to be, and it
Right.
wasn't working that well. And in the moment, Mahalia Jackson, who was a singer who traveled them, and said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And he paused, he took it in, and he said, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to talk about this idea of I have a dream, which he had done nuggets of in other speeches, but never in the exact language he used there. And he
Right.
jumps into it. And so I think for me, the reason I love to share that story is because being performing at your highest level is about doing all of the preparation, doing all of the work, and then being so in the moment that you're willing to change what's right in the moment. I was talking to
Right.
Ray Ringel, who I studied facilitation with at Georgetown, and she said that for her, the number one skill for facilitators, and I think for leaders too, is the ability to pivot, right?
Mm,
Because in the moment, may have prepared what is a brilliant speech, not just what you think is a brilliant speech, what is a brilliant speech, but in the moment, it's not what the room needs. It's not what the people in the group need. And are you willing to improvise and shift in the moment to try something better that they need? Because ultimately, it's about the people that you're with, whether it's 10 people at a conference table or a million people in front of you on the Washington Mall. You need to be able to have the respect for the audience to prepare and be amazingly prepared in advance, and have the respect to listen to the audience in the moment and
yeah.
see if they're resonating with what you're saying or if they need to hear something else in this moment, and think about what they
Yeah,
need.
100%. Thanks for sharing that. I know that for me, I remember a moment, I don't know, about 15 years ago, where I was asked to present with my leader at the time a framework, a perspective, an idea, if you will, with some partners and stakeholders around the table. It did not fly. Like it did not. We got roasted. And I remember saying, "Okay, let's time out. Let's go. I'll go grab a coffee so we could reset." And I remember telling my boss at the time, well, we need to shift our perspective around this, because if we don't pivot, we're going to lose the audience completely and our time here is wasted. And I remember him saying, no, we have our marching orders. We have to do this, we have to do this. And I said, no, 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 no. What we're saying is not, it's not resonating. So when we sat down, we reset the room with, what's our mission? What's our vision for why we're here? Trying to find that common ground. And then we improvised the rest of the entire day because I had no choice. But I just want to share with the audience that I just want to validate what you're saying here, Andrew, because that one shift, that one pivot in the room that day, over the course of 3 years and some negotiated conversations with these people, it resulted in a consensus endorsement of something that we had developed together to support. It's in the emergency management realm, where we support each other with health professional deployments across jurisdictions.
Mhm.
And it was one of those things where we would never have gotten that. We would have never been able to have those conversations. We would have never been able to get that consensus endorsement at the highest levels, like, government levels, without that pivot. So important. So thank you for bringing that up. Well, thank you for answering the question in that way, because it really just solidifies what I've always known, is that you need to be able to pivot. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just I think what was so, beautiful in that story, and I'm amazed at the transformation over the years, is that you were really listening to the people in the room, right? And
Yeah.
if there's one skill that for me improv is all about, is about being a better listener and practicing that skill. Because improv, you're always making everything up. You literally can't have it prepared and you have to do it together. So if you're not listening, it just doesn't work. So being
Yeah.
able to listen and practice that skill is so critical, because if you're not listening to those people in the room, then you're just literally talking over their heads. And it's, like you said, a waste of a day and potentially a waste of much longer time.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to them as you're sharing, it's just a beautiful story. So I'm glad you
And
shared it.
for companies, this could mean a waste in your bottom line. It could mean a reduction in profits, or it can be a reduction in efficiencies or effectiveness. So yeah, totally. It was so important. I love the fact that you're bringing this to workspaces. I want to thank you for being on the show, because I think this is such a really dynamic way to improve a lot of our skills as leaders. I see so much potential impact in this. So I'm curious, how do you as an individual, this is sort of like final question, bringing it back to the person, as an individual, how do you use these skills for yourself in your own life, and keeping yourself well balanced and keeping yourself sort of motivated and all that? How do you use these skills? I'm curious.
I definitely come back to them a lot. I think, we started the show talking about, my busy life and my kids. And honestly, in this era of my life, my improv skills have never been more valuable than being a parent and put to the
Yep.
test. And also practiced, because, children are really playing all the time. And my boys are 2 and 4 as we're recording this at this moment. And they're always ready to play and always ready for a game. And it's challenging, but it's also a beautiful practice. And I think for me, if I can bring, 1% of that playfulness and work together to the workplace, I think is so important. I've said for years, I think we need to treat adults more like kids and kids more like adults,
Yeah.
because I think when I was sharing the story about the woman drawing the logo, it's that creativity and that problem solving and that play that we all have as children, and unfortunately gets knocked out of a lot of us as we grow into adults. And so if we can find that element and bring that back, that's so important. So for me, I try to be reminded by my kids to keep playing, to not get stuck in what I'm doing, to always kind of think outside the box, and to also just recognize the value of this work and to try and get it to as many people as possible, because I really think that these skills are ones that help me find calm and relaxation in those stressful moments, and help me find play when I could find anger or frustration. And that's so important.
Love that so much. Thanks for so much for sharing. This is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. So if you're interested in anything that Andrew's talked about today, I really would invite you to reach out, which is a really good segue for let the people know where can they find you, so that if any of this resonated with them or they want to bring this into their organization, where do they find Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. So they can reach out to me, just Andrew at artlyworking.com, ARTLY. So kind of like Hartley Working, artlyworking.com. And we can start the conversation there. Of course, they can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and those fun places. And I'm working on my first book to hopefully come out next year. So I definitely want to share that with folks. It's called Participate, and it's really, I'm calling it a community change book, because the idea is it's a book about finding your personal courage and using that to help change and transform your community for the better, using a lot of these tools that I'm talking about. So thank you so much for having me, Tammy, and hope
no problem at all. And that book is so important because, gosh, we need this. We need this notion of community so much more now than ever. So thank you for that. Yeah. So I really enjoyed having Andrew here, folks. Go and check out Andrew. You'll have all the links in the show notes. So please connect with him if any of this resonated with you. And thanks for listening to the show, folks. If you found anything interesting in the show or you like this content, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, do all the things, because it really does help get this content out there for other leaders just like you who need or want to hear this kind of information. Help spread the word out, folks. It's literally free. It costs you nothing, and it's just good vibes all around. Until next time, stay grounded, stay inspired, and remember to exhale.